and welcome back to the Footie Frontline podcast brought to you by My Betting Mates. We're here today to dive all into the round 9 action, all the big talking points, all the big results. Nick Tavano and Ollie Caffrey back for this week. Ollie, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I guess what a weekend of football we've just had.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Good to be back. Matt filled the chair nicely last week with your little Collingwood podcast. You nuffed it up. But no, good to be back after a superb round of footy. Some really big results, some close games, some standout performances. It was really exciting. Watched a lot of it on the couch.
Yep.
So it was good to see.
Well, let's go back to Friday night. It was a Friday night doubleheader, and one of the games that really did sort of make headlines was the Geelong Port Adelaide game, which Port Adelaide did win. But the big headline to come out of that is Jeremy Cameron concussed during the game. He played on. He passed all the relevant tests for him to play on, but then the next day reported symptoms and he's into concussion protocol. It sparked more discussion around concussions and around, how, I guess, the AFL and how the footy world deals with them. It's an ongoing thing, I guess, all throughout sport. But I guess what did you take out of, what's been happening over the last few days?
It was unbelievable to watch. The AFL say they're taking concussion seriously, but blind Freddie watching on TV could tell that he needed to be assessed properly. Jeremy Cameron's head hit the ground in the last quarter. The game was on the line. He's probably their best player. He's a superstar of the competition, but he needed to come off. He didn't want to come off, but it should have been taken out of his hands. And I don't know what the actual answer is. It probably is independent doctors making those calls just to pull him off the ground, because the Geelong doctor came to him multiple times to try and get him off, and Jeremy Cameron just kept waving him away. So it wasn't a good look for the game. The AFL spoke pre-season about how it's the biggest issue they're probably tackling at the moment, just the concussions, and we've seen so many players struggle with it in recent times and been sadly forced to retire. And you've got Western Bulldogs star Tom Liberatore. He's sidelined at the moment after, I think it's his third concussion in less than 12 months, and there's big question marks around his future and even if he'll come back, which would be really, really sad because he's been such a great player for a long time. But yeah, it wasn't a good look at all, and I don't think the AFL handled it as well as they could have in that instance. They ticked off basically on Geelong's strategy on Friday night, but I don't know how they can come out at the start of the season and say it's the biggest issue they're dealing with from the league perspective, and then clearly someone's hurt. The head is smashed into the ground. He was groggy getting up, and they said all good. They followed the protocols. You could see it coming. He played out the game, but there was always going to be a chance that he was in the concussion protocols the next day, and it turned out exactly like that. So, yeah, really disappointing to see, and I think this is probably going to be a landmark case that we'll see, and we just can't have those scenes ever happen again. We saw last year Port Adelaide got absolutely smashed, deservedly so, for not doing the right thing with Aliir and Lockie Jones in the showdown. Those guys came off the ground after a big head clash. They got assessed, but were put back on the field, and then eventually were ruled out of the game. But yeah, they copped a $100,000 fine for that. And then this example, the AFL's ticked it off. So I just don't see how they could have watched that play out and thought it was okay. So I think massive changes coming for this. Surely independent doctors aren't too far away, because yeah, it is the number one issue in the game, concussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just seen already this year a couple of players have to announce their retirements due to concussion. I mean, we've had Angus Brayshaw, Nathan Murphy this year alone. You mentioned the doubt over when Tom Liberatore is going to come back. I mean, looking at it as well, Craig McRae confirming Bo McCreary has another week on the sidelines due to concussion. So not even the initial protocol isn't sometimes enough for someone to come back. I think, there's a need for greater education and greater sort of support and awareness around, what concussion is. I mean, the AFL, as we said, they did come out and say that Geelong conducted a HIA test at the ground, which included a video review and a clinical assessment of the player. Apparently the ARC got in touch with Geelong because they noticed that Jeremy Cameron was quite groggy. And then after the game, they did a SCAT 6. So they didn't feel like during the game he needed to do a SCAT 6 test, but did one after the game, and there were no signs of concussion. But then the following day, went into the club, said not feeling the best, and that's when all I guess it came back that he did have a concussion. So it was almost that delayed situation. Almost comes back to a little bit of common sense, though. You see someone's head hit the deck like that, it's just, you're off. Like, sorry, mate. Like, you know, you might not be feeling it right now, but who knows what you're going to be feeling in a couple of days' time. And the last thing that Geelong would want is, I'm sure that, you know, when you think about long-term sort of gain for short-term pain, I mean, that it's for not only Jeremy Cameron, but for the Cats as well. So we'll see what happens in the days ahead, but I'm sure this story will continue to evolve throughout the rest of the week. One of the other big talking points came from the final game of the round, and it's an interesting debate. This one's a little bit more of a novel debate in a sense. Adelaide and Brisbane played the second draw of the season. And every time there's a draw in the AFL, because they're so rare, the conversation always comes up about, do we need to have extra time during the regular season? I am staunchly on the side of no. I think draw is fine. I think, you know, if you can't find the winner, you can't find the winner. We don't need to have, you know, it doesn't need to continue. We can just settle with a draw. I mean, coming from a soccer background, it's like draw's fine, like whatever. But when there's a draw in the AFL, it seems like that, you know, the toys get thrown out of the pram. There's chaos everywhere. People don't know what to do with themselves. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I was always with you. I always just thought they happen so rarely. Sometimes not even one happens in a season. So just keep the draw. But yeah, the last few weeks, because this is the second draw in the last month, I think the last 3 weeks probably even. So yeah, the players seem to really want it, even more than the fans and even probably the broadcasters. Yeah, Jordan Dawson spoke after the game, said he was shattered, just wanted to keep going again. Yeah. Lachie Neale was the same. So yeah, they're probably the premier players on both sides. Wanting to do that. So, yeah, it's a really tough one. You go back to 2010 and we had the drawn grand final and that needed to change because it was one of the great grand finals. And then, well, obviously not for Collingwood supporters the week after. That was a great day for them, but it just felt almost a bit flat for neutrals, that replay. There wasn't even a capacity crowd in there that day. You got 100,000 the week before for the classic replay, classic grand final, and then the replay was, I think it was about 92 or something. So all the corporates and everything dropped off. But it's a difficult one. I don't think the AFL will change it anytime soon. If there are another 3 or 4 draws, it really will go to fever pitch. But at the moment, you're unlikely to see more than probably 3 in a season. Yeah, that was the first draw for the Lions since 2009, and the Crows have only played in 3 draws in their whole history, more than 30 years in the competition. So they are extremely rare. You do remember them. Everyone will remember the Anzac Day game a few weeks ago, mirroring the draw back in 1995. So, yeah, they are memorable occasions. And would they have the same effect if you go to extra time? I think probably during the season, it's still okay to keep the draws. Obviously, finals time, it's a different story.
Very different,
but, it's always a massive talking point. If there's one draw, that's all the coaches, all the players are going to be asked about it. Should we get rid of the draw and go to extra time? But, I think it's here to stay for now. We'll see what happens. But, it is AFL, so, they're not going to happen super regularly. So you can probably keep it as is.
I think it's fine. I mean, 2 points is better than nothing at the end of the day. Like, it still could be the difference between you not making the 8 or making the 8. So, I mean, at the end of the day, in some of these games, like on Anzac Day and even probably yesterday as well, a draw is actually fitting of the game itself. You know, it's such a tightly contested game. Maybe a draw is just the best result, you know, instead of having a winner. Sorry. I mean, it's just putting it, you know, bluntly that, you know, that I think, you know, it's okay to have that a little bit sometimes. Yeah, fans don't know what to do with themselves, players don't know what to do with themselves, but that's what makes the game interesting. It's like when something like this happens, it's rare. It's like, you know, when there's a goal after the siren, it's rare. Like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel because of, you know, a few games here and there where there's a draw. So, look, I'm sure that if it became a regular occurrence, if it was like, say, how it's in the NBA, there's overtime and everything like that, and it's happening every matter of days, very different. But I don't know. I think, like, unless it became a situation like in the NFL where you play overtime and then if you don't have a winner, it's a conclusive draw after that. You don't like go to a shootout or whatever it might be. But even then, like it's such a unique game. It's hard to kind of, you know, find what the right answer is. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Might get another draw this week. Who knows? Let's have a look ahead to this weekend. It all starts again on Thursday night up in Darwin. Gold Coast up against Geelong. Primetime football up in the top end. It's going to be a very interesting game because the Cats coming into this off the back of 2 defeats, taking on a Gold Coast side who have been very good at home. They won their game in Darwin that they really was expected of them to do against North Melbourne last week, but it's a huge litmus test for the Suns coming up against the Cats this Thursday.
Yeah, massive opportunity for the Suns. They've fallen short in some big games this season. Blown away by Brisbane when the Lions had a lot of injuries that game. They really set themselves up for that one. Could have ended the Lions season, but we're really disappointing. We're, completely outplayed by Sydney. So, to really come up against a quality team, a team that's in premiership contention, top 4 contention, this is probably the biggest game under Damien Hardwick yet. So, and they've got a massive opportunity. They play really well in Darwin. They have over. It's their second home up there. They've built a little fortress there, won both games there last season, and then, obviously smashed Kangaroos on the weekend. So, and without Jeremy Cameron and potentially without Tom Hawkins as well, they really want Tom Hawkins to break the record back at home. So their intention is to sit him out at this stage, but that could change with Jeremy Cameron unavailable as well. So it's going to be a really ripping contest. And Gold Coast, I think they're just getting their act together. They've been very, very inconsistent under Damien Hardwick, but so much better at home than away this year. They've won all their scheduled home games, the one in Darwin and then the ones on the Gold Coast as well. So I can see the Suns getting up in this one. Just they've acclimatised to the conditions up there. They've stayed up there after that game against North Melbourne. They're used to the conditions. Geelong hasn't played up there for, I don't know if they've ever played up there.
I think they've ever played up there in a regular season game, no.
So new conditions for them. Very humid up there. They might struggle to cope. I think the Suns can get up in this one in an upset and make it 3 straight defeats for the Cats.
God, that'd be something. I mean, after what we were talking about Geelong a few weeks ago, undefeated, looking the goods, after that win against Carlton, now suddenly how things have changed so quickly. It's funny because even if Hawkins does play, Hawkins the last 5 or 6 weeks has been just out of sorts and really struggling. So it'll be fascinating to see what sort of moves Chris Scott makes during the week. Does he go with Ollie Henry and play with young Shannon Neal as well? What sort of, strategy is in place to sort of cover that loss? But you are right, Gold Coast should go on with all the confidence in the world that this is a great opportunity to beat the Cats. They did beat them as well last year up in Gold Coast as well, so they've got a bit of history on their side, as much as it hasn't always been a common occurrence for them to beat Geelong. It's just probably one of the toughest games to pick because, Gold Coast have stayed up there. Geelong have had the extra day break, yes, but I don't know. There's every part of me that doesn't want to say Geelong can lose 3 games in a row, but this is the sort of game where you look at it and you go, I think the Suns could do it. So I'm going to pick the Suns in a tight one. I reckon they get over the line by a couple of goals. One of the great wins in their team's history, and Took Miller looking good for 25 plus in that game as well. Friday night footy at the SCG, probably one of, if not the game of the round. Sydney up against Carlton. Sydney continue to flex at the moment, looking like the team to beat right now. The Blues, they got back to winning ways. It was got a bit nervous towards the end there. It looks like the game was done, and then Melbourne came from the clouds and almost pinched it basically off Christian Petrarca's own boot. But Carlton surviving a massive scare, but getting the 4 points, but now heading over to Sydney to take on a Sydney side that is probably going to be Carlton's biggest test so far this year.
I know they have a massive rivalry with Collingwood, but Carlton are just imitating the Magpies with all their close games. It's just ridiculous. Like, even when you think they're going to have an easy win, they just let it go right to the final minutes. And, they're probably lucky in the end to actually escape with that because Melbourne were charging home. Petrarca was incredible. That was probably the best individual performance of the season. From my point of view, he was outstanding. So, up there, the Swans are firing on top of the ladder, a game clear and percentage. They couldn't have asked for a better start. It's incredible. Their only loss for the season was against Richmond, who we'll talk about later. They're really struggling. But, the Swans at SCG, they've really built that into a fortress again. They're very hard to beat there. So I think Carlton are just playing too inconsistently within games at the moment. Their best footy it's premiership winning footy, but they don't do it for 4 quarters. They'll put together a great 1 quarter, then slip off. Their intensity is probably not quite there at the moment. So I think the Swans will get up this one and, continue their excellent start to the season.
Yeah, I can't see Sydney losing this game at the SCG. I think if this game was in Melbourne, you'd probably feel a bit more confident maybe back in the Blues, but the SCG, Sydney are just way too good. It's an odd ground to play at. It's a lot smaller. It's not an easy ground for anyone to go out and get 4 points. I just don't see Carlton being able to do it. Although I do think Charlie Curnow looking good for multiple goals in that game. It's almost a bit of a gimme, but I think Sydney do come away with the win. Saturday afternoon at the MCG, Collingwood against Adelaide. These two sides sides played out 2 of the games of the year last year at Adelaide Oval in the MCG. I mean, the last time they played, there was a bit of conjecture about how that game ended. Maybe Adelaide should have had a shot after the siren to win the game, but that's all right. That's ancient history now. Collingwood, they've found some form. Did what they had to do against West Coast despite the injuries. Adelaide, much improved as well. This game suddenly has become quite an interesting game given the form that both teams are going into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the injuries are really starting to pile up for Collingwood. Didn't affect them against West Coast. They were excellent. Some of those guys that came in, Richards, Finn McRae, that was a breakout game for him. You'd get a lot of confidence out of that one. So, and I think the whole team would have got a lot of confidence out of that one. You go in without DeGoey, Tom Mitchell, Myercheck, long list of names there, and they just got the job done so convincingly. The Eagles, they're struggling. They've had a couple of good wins, but yeah, the depth's not there. They lost Elliot Yeo and Waterman before the game, so that was always going to hurt them. But yeah, I think Collingwood just at the MCG, they just don't lose too many there. But Adelaide have really found some form in the last month or so. Yeah, could have made it 3 out of the last 4. Just got that draw in the end, but they were really good during that game. It was an absolute classic. The Adelaide Oval to finish the round off. Their better players are getting into form again. Darcy Fogarty is firing up forward for them, and the midfield's starting to look better. Their ball movement is just so much better at the moment. They really struggled with that early in the season, but that is a big thing against Collingwood. You need to have the ball movement going, and they pushed them in both games last year. So it's going to come down to the wire, I reckon. Adelaide might get within a couple of goals, but I think Collingwood, just because it's at home, if it's at Adelaide Oval, even though Collingwood play well at the Adelaide Oval, I think the Magpies will get the job done at the MCG. Yeah,
I don't believe Adelaide have beaten Collingwood since 2016. I think it's 8 years. They had a draw in 2017. I think that was actually the last draw Adelaide had played.
It was. McGovern when he was still playing for the Crows.
Correct. So these two teams have, Collingwood's had the wood over Adelaide for quite a while now. But as you mentioned, last year, those 2 games were absolute nail-biters. As you spoke about, the injuries are piling up. No Jeremy Howe this week, Harvey Harrison, Jack Bytel, who came in as well, concussed. So, and I don't think there's going to be too many of those players coming back, bar Lockie Schultz from suspension, and maybe one of Jordan DeGoey and Tom Mitchell, or maybe both. But no Elliott, no Myercheck, no Beau McCreary, no Jeremy Howe. It's another tall task for Collingwood, and they're going to have to go deeper into the reserves to find who's next to come in and be able to fill in the role. But I still think that what we've seen from the players that came in, when you look at Joe Richards, who looked at home at that level, was unbelievable in his first game. Yeah, Finn McRae playing as a forward, kicking 3 goals, very impressive. But even it's the top end players now that are really standing up, like Jack Crisp finding some really good form again. Still side bottom now, playing off half back, looks like a bit of a reinvigoration for him after a bit of a slow start. So I still think Collingwood will do enough to win this game, but it's not going to be a convincing, resounding win like it was on Sunday. So I think the Pies get up, and Jack Crisp looking good for 30 plus in this game as well. Now, this one here on Saturday is always a spicy affair. GWS against the Western Bulldogs. These two creating one of the great modern rivalries over the last decade. Up in Parramatta for this game as well. In Homebush for this game. Sorry, but we're getting the suburbs mixed up. But GWS against the Bulldogs. The Giants, I mean, it's been a weird patch for them. Obviously, it was a tough week last week for them for everything that was going on off the field with the passing of Cam McCarthy, but they've now lost their last 2 games. The Bulldogs, they did what they had to do against Richmond, got a much-needed win. But this game, it's a big one for the Giants. They need to bounce back and find some form again.
Yeah, they've really had a massive dip. It's 3 out of the last 4. Lost the last 3, but 3 out of the last 4. So that's really concerning considering how good they looked at the start of the season. And there's really no excuses for the form as well. They were in that game against Carlton a few weeks ago, in it again. It was a very similar game, actually, the game on the weekend when they lost against Essendon to that game against Carlton. Dominated early and just got overrun. They just couldn't do anything to halt Essendon's momentum. They just really struggled. And, they're just found themselves in a dip. They were excellent against the Lions in Canberra, but that seems to be the outlier at the moment for the Giants. They're not playing their best footy. So, Adam Kingsley and the coaching staff really need to get to work to this week to fix what's going on there, just to get their ball movement back to where it was early in the season. So, it should be a cracking encounter. Toby Green, I'm sure, will be right amongst it with Marcus Bontempelli. These teams something always happens when these teams play. So, 4:35. It's the Giants' home ground for this one. So I think the Giants, just because it's at home, they haven't actually played at Homebush for a number of weeks now because you got the Royal Sydney show kicks them off there for a while. They've had a couple of games in Canberra, been on the road for a while. So I think back at home, they'll really enjoy that. And we'll make it another loss for the Bulldogs, who are just really inconsistent at the moment. It seems to be one week they're just so convincing. They look like one of the best teams in the competition. And then the week after, poor performance, and then the heat's on again. So they respond well to the criticism, don't respond well to playing consistent footy. So I think the Giants.
Well, the interesting part is, I mean, every single time, I mean, as much as they did beat Richmond, as you said, how much pressure does it actually alleviate off Luke Beveridge? Because they beat it down on a Richmond team that are out of sorts, one win all season, so many players out. They did what they had to do. Like, you know, you can only beat the teams that are in front of you. But to really take the pressure off, you go and beat GWS and suddenly things are feeling a lot better, and they've got a really good percentage as well because they've had some of their wins this year have been massive wins. Like they've won by some huge margins. Like,
their smallest win's 48 points.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. Like, you know, like all their wins have been massive. So when they win big, but their losses though, it's what happens on the other side of that. It's finding that consistency. But GWS have to bounce back. I mean, back at home, I can't see them losing this game. I think they'll be up for this, you know, line in the sand moment for them where they have to sort of find that consistency again. Don't want to lose too much ground with the sides above them, and then with the teams coming up that are starting to find form as well. They don't want to lose too much ground on them. So I think they'll come away with the win against the Doggies. It's going to be a good game though. As you said, it always is. There'll be probably a storyline that comes out of that will dominate the, you know, the discourse coming out of it. You know, don't want to have a go knock on wood, say there might be something in the tribunal like there always is.
Sure,
but we'll see what happens. But the Bont looking good for 25 plus in that game as well. Saturday night at Marvel Stadium, St Kilda against the Dockers. The Saints are in all sorts at the moment. Another disappointing loss on the weekend against Hawthorn. Fremantle, we spoke about the tough circumstances for GWS. The same situation for Fremantle. Friday night loss against Sydney. This is a game for both teams that they, especially for St Kilda, they need to bounce back and get results. But Fremantle as well, a chance to get back on the winners list as well.
This is going to be a real slugfest, this one. Both teams play a really defensive, grinding style of footy. So, 10 goals might win this one. Might be enough to win the game under the roof at Marvel Stadium. So, St Kilda to lose to Hawthorn. They had their chances, but could never really gain any ascendancy. It was a scrap for the 3 quarters. The first quarter looked like it could open up a bit, but then it really evened itself out. And, St Kilda to not win that game, they would be absolutely shattered. So, 3 and 6 now, the Saints. So, it's going to be a really long way back for them if they want to back up their finals performance from last year. But they're just not getting any consistency. They've had a few crucial injuries, and I've spoke about it all the way through the season. Their best 23 is pretty good, but it just falls away so dramatically. If they get the best team out in the park, they're very good.
Absolutely.
But, too many injuries, and they just can't cover. So, Max King, a bit out of form. You'd like to see a bit more from him. He had all those shoulder injuries last year, so maybe he's still finding a bit of confidence back from that. But, I think this one might go down to the wire and might be like 60 to 55 or something like that. And I think St Kilda might just get the job done at Marvel Stadium. But, Freo, I don't think you can read too much into the game against Sydney. They actually came out pretty well. They just couldn't
convert.
Kick. It was I'd never seen anything like it. Sydney not only kicked straight, it was 10-1 at one stage to 1-10 for the Dockers. So could have been a totally different game otherwise. But, the emotion in that game, like you can't possibly judge how much of an impact that would have had on the whole team, especially the guys that did play with Cam McCarthy. So, really tough circumstances. And Justin Longmuir said there were guys that were actively contemplating not even taking part in that game because the emotion was so raw. So, I think the Dockers will put in a good performance. But, I think it's just a bit of a line in the sand game for the Saints. There's going to be a lot of heat on them this week. Ross Lyon is starting to cop some heat. He's sort of in the same position that Brett Ratton was when he was sacked. So I think the Saints might just get the job done.
They have to win this game. Like, they have to, if they want any chance of having a bit of a run and getting in towards actually cutting that gap towards the top 8, they really have to win this. This was a good run starting from last week. They played North Melbourne of games where they could look at and really start to build off it, but They're 1-1. They need to probably be 2-0, going into this one where they could really kick on. That loss against Hawthorn was so disappointing on so many levels. They just look so out of sorts at the moment. And I mean, in all due respect to Hawthorn, Hawthorn had a good win against the Bulls the week before, but if you want to play finals, you've got to be beating Hawthorn.
Yeah.
You've got to be beating those sides that are down that end of the table. Otherwise, you really are setting yourself, up for failure. You're fighting an uphill battle the entire year. So I think that they will win this one at Marvel, though. I think that they will respond. It's not going to be a game that I think fans, neutrals or Saints or Freo fans will be rushing back to watch the replay anytime soon. I think it's going to be potentially under 130 points, I think, between the two sides, as you mentioned. But I think that the Saints just get up. Josh Tracy, though, has been some good form for the Dockers, and I think he's going to kick multiple goals. So that's one tip to keep a bit of an eye on Saturday night. The other game on Saturday, Brisbane against the Tigers. Usually this has been a really good game. It's been between two teams that are up the upper end of the table, but suddenly now the tables have flipped. The Brisbane, a win and a draw in their last two, some better signs, not entirely, back to their best just yet, but Richmond, it has felt like in the last few weeks that the bottom has fallen out a little bit from them. It was a very disappointing loss over the last against Fremantle and the Bulldogs. And it's going to be a very rough end to the rest of the year for the Tigers and their fans.
Yeah, and this is, the Bulldogs last week was probably the start of a really tough run for the Tigers. They've lost some games that were winnable, but now it's a really tough run, and it starts on Saturday night at the Gabba. So, really tough proposition going up there. The Lions won by about 80 points up there last year, and, you fear it could be something similar this time around because, they were non-competitive, really, in some of that game against the Bulldogs. They just it looked like an AFL team against a VFL team at times. Like, I feared it was going to be even more ugly, just how the game was panning out. Yeah, some of the more experienced, better players for Richmond just looked a bit out of sorts as well. Shea Bolton barely touched it in the first half. And, when you have so many injuries, you need those elite players to really stand up and just say, come with me, boys. I'm showing you the way. But he just didn't do that. So, they might cop a bit of heat this week. So, that might boost them up a bit to put in a better performance. But, like you said, the Lions have recaptured a bit of form. Really good against the Gold Coast in, really trying circumstances with all those injuries. 2 ACLs in the one game. It was unbelievable. But, even just getting the 2 points from that road trip to Adelaide Oval, like we spoke about earlier, both teams could probably say we should have won, but also you'd probably take the 2 points with how even it was. Every single break in that game, it was under a goal. Either side. So, terrific game, that one. And, I think the Lions are just clicking into gear a bit and should say a pretty comfortable win at the Gabba.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that the effort is back at least. I think, they just took on a really, a much improved Adelaide team on the weekend, as you mentioned. Like, it was really a flip of a coin at the end of it. But, I can't see them losing this game. It would take something remarkable for that to happen. I think that they'll come away with quite a comfortable win, and Charlie Cameron looking good for multiple goals in that game as well. Action continues on Sunday. Triple header starts at Marvel Stadium. Essendon against North Melbourne. The Bombers fans are up and about at the moment. They are up and about. They got their convincing win. They're flying. I was listening to SEN this morning and the texts were flying in. They were up and about. They are feeling themselves right now. But if there's ever a game for Essendon to lose,
surely not.
If there is ever a game, it's the most Essendon. There are Essendon fans I've spoken to who are nervous at the moment going into this weekend because how many times in Essendon's history have these sort of games been the ones that they find themselves on the rotten side of? So they take on the winless Kangaroos, who have looked like that first win seems a mile off. These two teams have played some great games in the past when North Melbourne have been a lot better. But do you give them any chance because of history, because of it would be a peak Essendon thing to do to lose this game, or Essendon just that's all in the past now? It's this is a new chapter now in the Bombers' history.
As hilarious as it would be to see that happen, absolutely not. North Melbourne are shocking at the moment. They're even worse than they were last year, and their experienced players just look like they're almost broken. On the field, like some of the guys that have just gone completely backwards. Even Nick Larkey doesn't look to be himself, even though he was outstanding last year and getting into the All-Australian squad. But, Yeah, I think Essendon, their percentages, they're in third place on the ladder, but their percentage is under 100.
Yeah.
So they'll see this game as a big opportunity just to boost that percentage. North Melbourne's last 6 weeks or so, they've been belted by about 10 goals average every week. So I don't give them any chance. They did push them pretty well in both games they played last year, especially at the end of the season. And Essendon almost lost against North Melbourne and West Coast, and I think might have been within a 3-week block there, and they just escaped. But yeah, they're playing a lot better at the moment. Brad Scott's got them humming. They look really good. So I think they'll get the job done.
Look, I'm all about the comedy, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think it would just be interesting to see if it's a little bit tight going into halftime and there's that bit of nerves sort of seep in, and it's sort of like that, oh boy, here we go again. But I do think Essendon are going to be too strong. They can't lose this game. They've been a lot better recently. The last little patch, like especially against GWS, that was a statement win. We spoke about GWS's struggles. They were all born off Essendon's pressure. They bullied GWS, and how rare has it been that anyone's been able to actually come out and say we bullied GWS, especially over the last, probably since the second half of last season.
Yeah, the pressure was through the roof, especially in that last quarter. I think it was like 240 or something.
Yeah, it was insane.
Levels.
Yeah, and their forward pressure was great. Like the way that they weren't reliant. Like you hear that Zach Merritt's been so great and almost been carrying them in some games, but it was just a collective effort from back to front. They were great. And even the inclusion of Mac Guelfi playing as a defensive forward, kicked 3 goals, was great all day. I just can't see them losing this game. North need to show something. I feel like we say it every week. And this is the game to do it, to stir a bit of excitement amongst them. But I don't see it. I think these next 2 weeks for the Bombers will be percentage games for them, North and then Richmond in Dreamtime. Yeah. Great chance for them to build that up a little bit because as much as you get points on the board, you want to be putting yourself in the best position percentage as well. Continues on Sunday in Adelaide, Power against the Hawks at Adelaide Oval. Hawthorn, they got a bit of momentum at the moment, back-to-back wins, some tight wins against both the Bulldogs and the Saints. Port Adelaide, they needed to win that game against Geelong. They did. They were impressive. Very impressive in the first half, but then almost capitulated in the second half incredibly. Do you think the Power roll on and come away with the win against the Hawks here?
I think they do at home. They would have taken so much confidence out of winning down in Geelong. Absolutely outstanding in that first half, especially the first quarter. Yeah. They looked so good. I don't think we've seen the Power look that good for
a
long time. Just to go down there, silence the crowd, put 8 goals on the board, and Geelong, I think the game started at 7:10, but I think Geelong thought the game was starting at 7:40 like it would on a normal Friday night. It was just an amazing ambush down at the Cattery. And, it was really led from the midfield. Jason Horne-Francis, Zach Butters, he was brilliant. And the forward line stood up. Willie Rowley, he was brilliant. Absolutely one of the best players in the competition to watch when he's up and about, just the things he can do. So, as good as Hawthorn have been the last couple of weeks, going over to Adelaide Oval with the Port Adelaide team really up and about, it's going to be a different story. And I don't think it'll be belting like it was last year when we saw Port Adelaide gets about 100 points in front at halftime. But, Port Adelaide should win pretty comfortably. And, some of those young stars are really taking steps forward for the Power. And, we'll see if they can put consistent performances on the board now. As much confidence as they'll take out of that game, they need to string some of those performances together in a row.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is the game that they tend to, in all due respect, but they tend to beat down on the lower teams on the ladder, and they find a way to win these games quite convincingly. And I think they'll do the same here. I don't think it will be like, as you said, like last year, but maybe a 5 or 6 goal win. Hawthorn have been much better the last couple of weeks. Their effort's just been much improved in the middle. Like Sam Mitchell's lit the fire under them, and they look like they're starting to really find a bit of a groove. And this is what we were hoping to see from Hawthorn this year as well. But going over to Adelaide, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult for them. And you mentioned Jason Horne-Francis looking the good for 25 plus in that game as well. Final game of the round at Optus Stadium, West Coast against Melbourne. It was looking better for West Coast over a little patch. It was looking better, but they fell to bits in the second quarter against Collingwood over the weekend. Melbourne, they're going to be chomping to get back on the winners list. They've had a good break now going into this game against the Eagles, but a chance for them to find find themselves back on the winners list after I think it was a weird game against Carlton. They finished so well, but they were just jumped. They were jumped in the first half, and they were always fighting an uphill battle. Do you see this going any other way other than a Melbourne win?
Nah, big Melbourne win this one. I think they'll go over there and really look to make a statement, get some percentage on the board. West Coast, without Elliot Yeo and Waterman against Collingwood, they just looked like they were back to 2022, 2023 form. And with Harley Reid taking a big spec he got on the back page of the Western Australian. I called it at the time. I said, that is their back page for tomorrow. It doesn't matter if Eagles lose by 10 goals. That will be on the back page. And 6 hours later, they revealed it.
Tell you what, the editors would have been absolutely loving that when they saw it. I was like, we are done for the day. We are settled. There it is. Yeah,
it's done. But yeah, West Coast, they need to respond after how bad they were against Collingwood. There's no shame in losing to Collingwood. It was just the way they did it. And with all the injuries the Magpies had, they were beaten up by young, inexperienced guys. Joe Richards, Finn McRae, Reef McInnes, they were tearing them apart. Yeah. And there's no excuses for that. So I think probably a 10-goal win for the D's over there. Petrarca, he was sensational, as we spoke about earlier. And, Max Gawn could get busy and might put in a 3-vote type of performance over there, I reckon.
Well, you talk about more outs, I mean, Jerry McGovern hurt his ribs. There's probably every chance he's not going to play this week. Jack Darling's facing a potential bit of scrutiny if he's hit on Jack Bytel. I mean, I know Jack Darling hasn't been the same Jack Darling we've seen years gone by, but that's more experience out of the team. And that's the last thing West Coast need, are more bodies out. I think this could get ugly. And I think if you're Melbourne, I know they've had their forward line issues and, you're taking somewhere, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but Christian Petrarca, I think you've found your full forward. I think you've got to stick with it. And I think if they could put him up forward, I think he's going to kick 3+ and he could be looking like potentially an answer, at least for the rest of the season, because they've tried everything. Nothing's worked as a consistent answer for them up forward. But Christian Petrarca showed, despite playing maybe a little bit undersized, he can win a game off his own boot in any given week. So I think that Melbourne might have their player right there. But Ollie, that's all we've got time for this week. Looking forward to a bumper round 10, and we'll go through it all again next week. So thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Nick.
Be back again next week for a full review of round 10, looking ahead to round 11. Thank you again for watching.